Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Let's have a look at a game from the 2008 Corus tournament. On the white end, Vladimir Kramnik, and he's paired against Magnus Carlsen. The approach Carlsen takes with his Hedgehog defense is one I hadn't seen before. With the Hedgehog defense, you typically look to play on the queenside. You'll have in mind two key pawn breaks. In this game, though, we have Kingside aggression. And one of those don't try this at home type of moves surfaces, a move where you must weigh its negatives very carefully. So let's hop to it. Let's get some moves on. And if nothing is coming to mind when you hear Hedgehog defense or Hedgehog formation, you'll see what that looks like by move 9. The c5 move is looking to address an eventual pawn duo. As soon as it's on board, it's going to be eliminated. The little race to get on the long, light diagonal. It's important that black has the bishop on b7 before the knight has an opportunity to move and unleash the bishop to attack the rook directly. Mission accomplished here. If black isn't timely, black could be inconvenienced with some type of knight jump. Okay, castles, bishop e7. There's the pawn duo, and it's short-lived. The queen recaptures, a new piece is brought to life. d1 is vacated. This is a half-open file. A white rook definitely wants to be there. Small pawn center is how we describe this setup here. No great weaknesses have been created with regard to the 4 center squares. There is, however, the c6 square to be mindful of. This is a weakness black has just created. It's a hole. And a potential outpost can maybe surface. It's a square that can maybe be exploited by white. Maybe a pawn one day controls c6, that hole, and then a knight is a blink away from getting in there. That could certainly be disruptive. Anyhow, something to note. A weakness behind that last move. Half open file for white. And a quick pop quiz. Move 9. What move would you play here? Feel free to pause the video. Okay. This move right here, knight c6, I think would tempt many players because you're developing a piece with an attack, and that's very often a good thing. But there's reason not to play knight c6. What's a reason or two? The bishop's eyes want to stay open. Black wants to be in a position to welcome a light square bishop exchange, and you could go one step further and say black enjoys retaining some flexibility with the queen knight. d7, c6, I'm not going to tell you where I'm going with that knight just yet. So what does black play? a6. And this here completes this hedgehog formation, this hedgehog defense. A group of 4 pawns on the 6th rank, controlling 6 5th rank squares. No white pieces are going to jump on those 6th rank squares. a6 is controlling b5, keeping a knight out of b5, securing a queen on c7, and there's an additional point. b5 is one of the 2 key pawn breaks I referenced at the start of this video, and one other one that I did not appreciate. There's one other idea behind a6 that I did not appreciate until I viewed this game. What is the second key pawn break? It's going to be d5. These are the 2. What do they have in common? They're both striking at white's best pawn, this guy in c4. d5 is almost always going to be the main break you want to get in if you can get it in to help free your pieces, create more options for your pieces. We have this 2-to-1 majority in the center. d5 is the main one to be on the lookout for. Okay. From here we have knight to g5. So this is welcoming a light square bishop exchange. White is okay with giving up their fianchettoed bishop. That's a very important minor piece. So if Kramnik's going to if Kramnik is welcome to this exchange, what is his justification? Well, I believe what he has his eye on is the weakest square in black's position. Or excuse me, the weakest pawn. And that weakest pawn is d6. The d6 pawn is accessible to all white pieces. The knight on g5 can go to e4. Both can go to e4. The bishop could go to a3, and the majors can stack themselves on the d file. Black needs to take some care, over d6. That's for sure. Knight c6 only now. Queen f4, not just to any square. Keeps an eye on d6. Castles. Knight on c to e4. And another pop quiz. What is Carlsen's next move? It's Stockfish14 is a fan of this next move. Feel free to pause the video. Okay, here we go. Knight to e8. When I initially skimmed through this game, this was the first moment that grabbed my attention. That's definitely different, knight to e8. Counterintuitive is maybe another way to describe knight to e8. White enjoys more space in this position. Has this further advanced pawn, more freedom of movement for white. When you have this freedom of movement, normally, the general rule says you really shouldn't be so welcome to piece exchanges. And, when you look at it from black's perspective, black is a little cramped. Shouldn't black be welcome to a knight exchange instead of retreating like this? What is the justification behind knight to e8? What is a more concrete way to look at the knight to e8 move? I cited a general rule. Well, something specifically going on here is that there's now a battery released on that g5 knight. And black is going to look to expand on the kingside. He's going to try and rattle these posts of the knights and even the queen. The knight retreat is allowing the f-pawn to advance, but not just yet. e6 would be a vulnerable point. Let's get some moves in. b3, rook to a7. This is this new thing I learned from this game. That a6 move is allowing this little maneuver, rook a7 to now d7. That's a cool maneuver. Supporting d6, maybe supporting d5 break. It's worth noting that on this move right here, instead of the rook lift, black had already considered b5 on this move and also this move right here. But no breaks like that in this game. We're not going to have that b5 or d5. Rook a to c1, knight to c7. My initial reaction to this was, oh, how clever. Look at that knight post. You're supporting those two typical breaks. But, that would definitely not be a good idea here. You'd be unleashing the rook to see the knight on c6. What is knight on c7 doing? It is supporting the pawn on e6. This is enabling black to play f5, scare the knight away, and then win the piece on g5. If black tried to do this right now, knight takes e6. That's going to hurt. Queen's hit. And if black tries to be clever and say, oh, I could attack your queen. You take my queen, I take your queen. I think that's working pretty good for white. Threatening mate, threatening the queen. Black is toast. Okay, so knight c7. This next sequence of moves is pretty interesting. Right now, all these pieces are huddled up for black. Seems very cramped. White enjoys more space, right? But now, white gets pushed around. White, with this next move, goes back to f3 voluntarily. Is anticipating this push, so doesn't want to lose the piece. Knight f3, f5 hits. The knight goes back. If the knight's going forward, you're asking for trouble with h6, knight h3, g5, g4, and you're in a fork. One of the knights is going to be knocked out with check. So you can't go forward. Got to go back. g5, this is that don't try this at home type move. This is the move you have to weigh very carefully. Look at the gaps that have been created on h4, h6, f6, all holes, and on top of it all, and maybe the first thing that crosses my mind when I see g5, it's that you've opened up this diagonal further for the bishop that's already on the main diagonal. This kind of stuff starts to run through my mind. Queen bishop battery, queen getting into h8 for mate. Very scary. So, queen goes back, continues to push, g4, and now bishop g5. Only move to save material. We have a skewer there. You have to play e3. Let's pause for a moment. That was a forceful sequence there of 4 moves. What has black gained? I pointed out some of the weaknesses, right? The weaknesses on the king side, the open diagonal. In what way has black benefited? Well, this square right here and this square right here are now excellent posts for knights. These guys are still a bit off from getting there, but we can identify both as holes. Earlier, when I initially made that d6 move, may have seemed a little misplaced for me to be speaking of that c6 square being a hole, talking about the pawn guarding it. We have this exact case right now in white's house. We have this hole on f3 being controlled by a black pawn. Now, if only we could get a black knight there, that will set up potential mating nets. That's big trouble for white long term. So you have to be careful of the f3 square. That's the main weakness, without question, in white's house. Okay. From here, after that forcing sequence, we now enter a phase of repositioning for each side. We have some maneuvering needed. So black connects the rooks. White gets off of an open diagonal. I guess you're also opening up a new square for the knight. Mission accomplished with this knight on c7. It's no longer necessary to defend e6, so we're working on improving our worst piece. This knight right here does not yet have a job. Knight e8. Maneuvering for white, looking at this, opening up that, maybe opening up a battery, queen bishop battery on that open diagonal. Knight f6, knight f4, have to babysit the e pawn, and after queen to c3, one of the move that was played here is rook to g7. Initially, I was thinking to myself in preparing for this video, I was going to point out this is a move you wouldn't want to play. But this is actually a top suggestion by the engine, so I wanted to look just a couple of moves down the line and see why that was kind of a cool thing to do, why it was okay to play that. I thought to myself, you wouldn't want to play e5 because you're giving up this square on d5. That's a big gap, but black can follow with knight e4 and say to himself, you know what, I'll put this bishop on d8 and not only be controlling your knight, but in a way controlling that rook. This guy doesn't have any forward moves. What's this rook really doing? Anyhow, I wanted to highlight this setup. This is another one of those proceed with caution type moves, e5. There is some benefit, of course. The main benefit black obtains in playing e5 is that you shut down this diagonal. So there is that little give and take. You give up d5, but you shut down the diagonal. It's another path. It is considered one of the better moves, e5. Okay, in this game, no weakness created. This pawn still sits back on d6. Rook to g8. This is allowing the knight to move so that there isn't going to be a queen to h8 mate, right? Hopefully nobody's tempted by knight to e4 there, attacking the queen. That would be the mate. And this is the kind of stuff that, comes to mind when you have that g5 move on board. Okay, so rook g8. And only now knight to e4. Queen b3. Rook back here, so now you can't get into that. You can't make use of c4 anymore. Defending e4. Or excuse me, defending e6 here. And queen to a4. This is where white starts to go astray at this point right here. I think one of the better moves the computer's pointing out instead of even the queen move is this h4 move. Trying to challenge this bishop, maybe flush it back. If black is taking, well, you'll notice that there's no longer that grip over the f3 square. Knight is there to recapture. H4 is considered one of the better moves in this position. But no h4 in this game. The queen is eyeing up 2 weak points on the queen side. So white's soon going to be winning a pawn because of that queen a4 move. Knight e5 is the follow-up. From here, queen takes a6, rook a7, and queen b5 follows. You can't take a second pawn. Queen takes b6 would be met with rook on e to b7, queen d4, only save square for the queen, and after bishop f6, look at this queen. She's in the center, but so are these guys. And they're controlling a lot of her squares. She has no other square to go to. The threat here, knight f3 with check, and the queen is toast. There's a second threat. Let's say white gets out of the knight move with check. The knight still goes there. Bishop's defended. The other threat is simply a skewer. You move the queen, there goes the bishop. At this point, the best would probably be to just give up the queen and get at least 2 minor pieces instead of giving up a clean bishop. All right. So what am I getting at? b6 is poison. Queen b5. Queens are gone. Material is restored. Black is clearly better. Look at these knights. Look at this weak square that black already eyes up. The rook is on the second rank. These pawns are doubled. Nothing is really tipping in white's favor. Throw in a check. This is not an inconvenience. Some repositioning. The bishop is doing nothing on g5, so some support of e5. I like this next decision by black to recapture with the pawn. And that means that you still have to react to this threat. Black is not giving, let's say, white an easy way to address this threat by getting a capture, and then there's kind of a free move in a way for white. Many different moves you could come up with, maybe. But yeah, instead it's, I'll take with the pawn, and now you got to do something with this guy. My bishop has an easier time. I'm nice and cozy here. The king is defending it. The knight is defending it. You're not even attacking it. You got to do something about that guy now. So white has to go on the defensive. There's nothing exciting going on the 8th rank. 1 piece there is not going to be enough. You have to go on the defensive. So battery on the A file. King to G2. There's no longer a queen around to bother the king, so he's stepping up, maybe getting off of the back rank with check. There's really not going to be a safe square for the king. White is pretty limited with the different moves he has in this position. Yeah, tough to suggest really anything for white. This post right here by the knight is fantastic. It's eyeing up both of these squares, and a knight on these two, f3 or h3, and a rook on g1, that's all it's really ever going to take to weave a mating net. So, excellent post for the knight. Also ready to move the pawn and get the bishops exchanged. e4 on board. Look at the grip over that square. Everything's there. Even if the knight is captured, a pawn recapturing, there's still some kind of mating net, taking away these two squares from the king, back rank mates. f3, a big, big problem. No doubt. Dark square bishop's gone. Rook a1. Tough to really suggest anything for white. Initially, I thought, oh, okay, you're going hunting for the b pawns. There's something more concerning here. White has to tend to this, doubling on the first rank. That's the big problem. So if you were to go pawn hunting as white, that's going to hurt. What are we doing, knight? If you want to save the knight, you got to move the knight. But what are we doing now? No way to stop rook e1 for mate in just a few. So, poison pawn, the b pawn again. Look at another role that this knight has. Defending here. This is maybe the weakest point in black's position. If there's this kind of coordinated effort on e6, that's no problem. It's covered. So once more, white has to retreat. The b pawn is gone. One of the b pawns. There's the second, gonzo. And from here we have a passer, so we look to push it. And we are, since we're up material, we're welcome to exchanges. So let's see these next few moves. The b pawn is rolling. Knight improves. King g2, rook d7, and we have h3. So if white in this position is capturing this pawn, we would exchange and then get to this back rank. This is a cool sequence. How are you stopping mate? Knight e2, only way. But now we have check. King has to go to the back, the first rank, and now discovered check. There goes your rook. So what might we say? This is indirectly defended because of that sequence threatening mate. Discovered check nearby. h3, e5. It's going to be winning either way, but I just want to emphasize the preciseness of the certain moves, right? You could go to the d file or the a file. You're going to the d file with this rook so that you have this square covered. You want to be able to flush the knight back and not deal with the check. It's always a reason, right? Why are we going to the d file instead of the a file in this case? All right. More exchanges. These guys are now doubled and isolated, but it doesn't matter. This guy is super good controlling the knight. All right. Just a couple pieces remaining. Knight back to its wonderful square on f3. Pawn is poison. Rook takes pawn. We're going to have a fork. And after rook to c2, this one's game over. What do you do here? White didn't even have a move. Where do you go with the knight? You can go back home. You're going to get mated. Like that. Or if you go to g2, we're capturing the knight for mate. Brutal, that f3 square. So from here, after rook to c2, this game goes no further. 57 moves in, Kramnik resigns right here. So what's the story? You have to capture if you want to not lose any more material straight away. If rook takes rook, we recapture, and if the king comes over like this, trying to get the pawn, we can give a check and then move the knight, and we're promoting next. White has to give up the knight for the pawn soon enough. And also, I guess the last one to look at is, suppose the knight goes here first. Well, there are 4 different ways we can maybe challenge that knight. We're going to go to this square right here where we have pawn support. So we give a check, go here, and same story. We're going to be getting the knight for the pawn like this and go on to win. So, yeah, An interesting game for sure. I learned a couple different ideas with this one, that knight to e8 move, that a6 move, seeing a different reason behind that, some little maneuver with the rook. I thought this was very instructive, that committal g5, g4, carving out the f3 square, the e4 square, f3 being the big one, allowing for these mating tricks and such. Anyhow, feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.